It's the 1680s. Which year? No one's sure. But a dude by the name of Henry Purcell has decided to write what might well be the first English opera. And of course, it was performed by an all-girls school? Based on Virgil's Aeneid, it tells the love story of Dido and Aeneas. And is called Dido and Aeneas. And when I came across it, I was blown away. And this is one of the reasons why I really want to like opera. Welcome to I Really Wanna Like Opera. This week, the second episode is going to focus on the oldest entirely-ish surviving English opera. I say ish because there's quite a bit lost, specifically the prologue, and some of the reconstructions have been, let us say, liberal in their additions. In the absence of evidence, a dramaturge will put pen to paper with their mind in the frame of the century, supposedly. Over those same centuries, there have been many attempts at recreating the original version. And here's where I get all interested in the minutiae. There's a Purcell Society, and it ain't new. It was founded in 1876, decades before recorded music, and it was a way to preserve and present the entirety of Purcell's oeuvre. They would also try and create the canonical version of Purcell's huge collection of works as scores, printed. They encouraged, funded, and sometimes ignored research onto Purcell's work to try and make each version as authentic as possible. They also published a fair bit of that research, though it was really about making the score feel as authentic as possible, less than doing the actual academic work to present it as a part of the literature. That's an important distinction, I think, because they were about making the work as Purcell-like as possible. And the research was just a means to an end. It was just the path you had to travel to get to the actual important thing, which is the music as Purcell wrote it and meant it to be heard. Now, by the 1960s, they realized there had been so much research that supported new readings of Purcell's work, and that contradicted the early ones, of course, that they started to issue revised editions. And this whole thing is one of the reasons why Purcell's work is still so widely performed, available. There are probably hundreds of operas that were written by other composers that just don't exist because no one cares about them today. We see this in a lot of different fields. But here it's clear the Purcell Society has maintained the lifeblood of Purcell's work. Now, there's still new scholarship being done today. And that's always going to be the case, I think. We've reached a point where so much is available that you can just replow the same land and actually get different results. And we see that here excessively. Now, the surviving work feels relatively complete. Not necessarily in every, note we still have surviving, but that the sense of the piece as a whole exists. Though I do have some issues with the pacing and structure. We'll talk about that later, though. This also taught me something I probably knew about opera, but never sort of intellectualized. The operatic delivery really obscures words in my ears. It's the long vowels. That's what does it to me. Now, this time I picked, again, a single performance that is available on YouTube. It is the Dido and Aeneas from the 2021 Royal Academy of Music. And I listened to this one. This is the first one I actually tried. And to sort of speak to that operatic delivery issue, I wondered why it was called an English opera. Was it just because Purcell was English? Because to my untrained ear, it sounded exactly the same as Eurydice's Italian. Now, I did something that I had done with Eurydice as well. I just stepped back, metaphorically. I stayed in the chair, and I'll be hard-pressed to get up from that chair. And I pulled up the lyrics, which are available a couple of different places. And listening to the singing, with the lyrics right next to them in a different plane on my computer, I started to catch on. I might only catch a single syllable, but I'm able to then attach to the next syllable as the words go on. This is hard. It really is. This is one of the things that I think has always kept me from getting more and more into opera, is this idea that the words aren't just sounds. And I think when I get to works like Philip Glass, for example, where the words have less meaning, individually at least, that I sort of start to find myself being more comfortable. Here, the words have meanings, and it's in a language I speak for the most part. It took about half an hour for me to get to the point where I could just understand what they were saying, and I still had to refer to the notes occasionally. Now, one thing that is interesting in the direction of the Purcell Society research on Dido and Aeneas, it's led them to something slightly different than had been considered previously. And the newest version, the newest sort of overall idea, and it's remained pretty popular over the past decade, is that Purcell was far bawdier than had previously been thought. The phrase I saw written somewhere is that Dido and Aeneas was a bit grittier than it had been believed. And I get that take. This was close to the period of living memory for Shakespeare, for example, and his work was clearly of the bawdy variety. The best argument I've heard is that Purcell was writing this for the court of Charles II, and his court, well, they were a rowdy bunch, and they were famously open-minded. But again, I have some thoughts on that later. Another interesting note about the opera, and one that the Purcell Society seems to have finally let go of, is that Dido and Aeneas was supposed to be community theater. There's a lot to be talked about there, and I think I'll go into it partly now. Now, there's a half-decent reason that this idea popped up, and it's probably a misrepresentation. The first performance we know happened, for sure, was in 1688. It was done by Josias Priest's Girls' School. Now, as time went on, the backstory of Dido and Aeneas had to be reconstructed. The assumption was that Purcell had composed it with that troupe in mind. They certainly did it in 1688 and again in 1689, much like my alma mater, Emerson, doing City of Angels both my freshman and sophomore years, because the material was there, and they'd already probably paid the performance rights fees. Those who were trying to achieve authentic Purcellism in the content had to work with the surviving material with the idea in mind that it had been created for this girls' school. But why? Why would Purcell, a big name at that point, have been writing pieces specifically for a small-time theater group at a girls' school? Now, could it have been a favor, like when Fremont High used to have Lindsey Buckingham pop by because he was Laura's uncle? Maybe. I think it's far more likely that the piece wasn't necessarily created for Josias Priest's Girls' School, but for the court at some point earlier, and most likely Purcell adapted it for the school. There is no surviving text of the music in Purcell's hand, though there is a libretto that may have been the form of the 1688 production. No one's quite sure, though. The idea that Purcell may have done a community version, like is often done with musicals for performance by high schools, does make a lot of sense to me. And there's a little bit more later that kind of makes it make even more sense. Josias Priest's school was mainly a dance school. In a way, he was the Martha Graham of his time, or maybe even the Arthur Murray. This is the same concept that Priest had done for Purcell's other sort of kind of operas, really just plays with songs inside of them. And perhaps he was trying to do Dido and Aeneas as sort of a road tryout. That would make sense if Purcell wanted to give an attempt at making a full-scale opera out of Dido and Aeneas. Having a smaller group out of the eye of the mainstream of the courtly world perhaps might make sense. Now, it's likely he would have had somewhat talented young women performers as his work group, which would make sense, at least. But the idea that he would have written it for amateurs, that's a stretch. If anything, I imagine he had written it for later performances with a more polished cast, and then dumbed it down later. It's hard to say. Purcell died in 1695, and as far as we know, it was never played again after the 1689 performances during his lifetime. Now, this doesn't mean it wasn't performed, it just means we don't know. To quote the scholar Nelson Muntz, records from that era are spotty at best. In the years following Purcell's death, there was only played once that we know of, as a part of a masque, sort of like an all-singing, all-dancing reviews with a play going on around it. And then the staged opera disappeared until 1705. That's 100 years with nothing. And then it was done as a concert version. One of the songs, though, Dido's Lament, was frequently performed. More on that also later. Now, it wouldn't get another major production anyone was aware of until 1895 when the Royal Academy did a version. There's some really interesting points there. One, that is 190 years of incredible rediscoveries happening. A lot of early opera, a lot of early plays were rediscovered and presented in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. That this didn't have one, it seems a stretch to me. It really does. Now, the first U.S. performance was by Rosemary's Girls' School at the Plaza Hotel in New York in the early 20s, and a concert version was done in 1924. Now, at this point, it's clear that the Purcell's work is clearly paying off, because by the 1930s, with a widely distributed version of Dido's and Aeneas' music available, groups around the world were playing it, and it had even been recorded several times in the 30s. The first complete concert version was recorded in 1931. Now, one of the things that does point to the new interpretation is the fact that the play might have been at least partly an allegory. There was a play by Nahum Tate, the author of the libretto, called Brutus of Alba, or The Enchanted Lovers, and that was intended to be an allegory for the marriage of William and Mary, which could have been tied here as well, which would point to the idea of the opera having been written for court instead of for the girls' school. That's at least a somewhat generous read, though, and I think it's certainly something there that we could look at. Tate also did a poem in which I consider a bit on the nose, called James I Aeneas, and using the people of Britain as his Dido. There certainly could have been that at play in this one, maybe, but that's certainly high-level stuff. The kind of thing that only high-thinking courtly types might go for. I don't know. The debates on the historicity here are difficult, but what's more interesting is thematically, how does this all play with one another? Okay, let's get to the actual opera part. How about? The first thing I need to say is that this is another mythic story based on the Aeneid by Homer. It'd be probably referred to as loosely adapted from if it were a movie today. The story tells of Dido, the founder queen of Carthage, who was deeply insmit with Aeneas, a Trojan leader. I believe he was mostly just a soldier, honestly. There is the thought that Dido was based on a real figure, but most of the things around her that have been placed upon her are myths. This is highly likely, in fact. The contrast with Orpheus is that it is likely that Orpheus, or Orfeo, was a myth who had real things attached to him, as opposed to here where a real person has mythical things attached to them. Go figure. But Dido's handmaiden, Belinda, says she should marry Aeneas, but Dido's concerned that love will make her a weak leader. This, of course, is a major theme in classical mythology. The idea that love leads inevitably to a fall. It's the classic story. It's the stranger walks into town. It's the Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla story. Love leads inevitably to the fall. Now, usually it's more pronounced for lust than for love, but that's a point of several of Zeus' story, right? Turns out that Aeneas is in love with Dido anyhow, so he proposes, but she denies. She denies his proposal. But she eventually agrees? Sort of a back and forth there. Since a prologue is missing, we don't know what that would have led us to, and how that would have led us to where we start. We know it existed, and it may have been only musical, in fact. And in fact, it's most likely it was only musical, so that would have been the dances to introduce our characters and their interactions. Imagine Dido and Aeneas dancing to show interest in one another. And we see some of that later on as well. Dance, of course, would be a big part of this, at least this existing version, because it was done at a girls' school which focused on dance. I think if we had it, it wouldn't really make things better, in far as us knowing what the whole piece was really about. Now, after we get their proposal and onwards, we go to a sorceress, which isn't in the Aeneid, actually, but it was in an early Tate play of Dido and Aeneas. Now, in that period, sorcerers, sorceresses, mages of all sorts usually represented the Catholic Church, at least in England. I'm not so sure how that played out in the continent, and certainly it wouldn't have in Catholic countries. They're plotting to get their hands on Carthage, so they come up with a plan. They're going to send Aeneas off to Italy. And surely Dido will die of a broken heart, right? Nothing makes more sense than a woman dying of loneliness when her one true love bounces out of town, right? This, of course, is a major theme of pretty much every man goes off to war story of the ancient world, and often so many of the not-so-ancient worlds. But in Greek and Roman myth, they're basically everywhere. The Odyssey has a healthy dose of it, along with what happens out of Athens stays out of Athens, if you kind of think about it. When we get Dido and Aeneas together, they have a lovely dance. It's really beautiful in the Royal Academy version.
Let Dido smile and I'll defy that feeble stroke of destiny. Not for mine, for empire's sake, some pity on your love take. Make not in a hopeless fire a hero fall, and joy once more expire.
It's clear that she's into him in a big way, but in a different way than in any of the other productions I've seen. It's not entirely lustful, and it's not also entirely... There's a sensuality to it that I think is impressive. Then again, the other dancers in the background do lend a bit of the naughty to it, which I like. There are a lot of dances in this, by the way. I certainly have to say that. And that makes sense. The way they present them is less, I don't want to say athletic, but it is more, how do you lend the music, which I believe they're using mostly period instruments in it. At least I believe there's an oud, in fact, or at least it sounds like one. How do you interpret that music without making it into a ballet? And I think they ride that line very well. Now, this is actually followed by one of the coolest versions I have heard in any opera so far. There are just a series of these ho, 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 laughter things from the chorus as they're doing this little dance. And it literally felt like the diabolical plot being revealed and the villainous group doing a group laugh in an early silent film or an early sound film. It's great because the enchantress and the sorcerer are going back and forth and the chorus does the laughing, and it's awesome. And it does something that you see today only pretty much in, the burlesque shows, what are they called? Vaudevilles, where the melodramas, where, you have the bad guy and you're instructed to boo them. This is you're instructed to realize, oh, this is a bad thing. I love it. Now, I want to say this very simple. The sorceress in this one is incredible. She's really cool. And I should note that sorceresses can be very easy to enjoy. Just think of Maleficent. But here, she works within the somewhat stiff operatic style. But she still imbues it with this sort of over-the-top villainy that somehow translates to her just being really cool. And she's absolutely magnetic in it. She's absolutely magnetic in it. Now, Dido, on the other hand, works best on stage, interacting with the other characters. I think really the sorceress works better alone. And I can draw a direct line-to-line comparison to Jesus Christ Superstar. And if you're like me and you were a theater nerd in the 80s and 90s, you probably love Jesus Christ Superstar. And what we have here is a Judas Jesus thing. Judas carries that show. But Jesus makes the most of every interaction he has with a character. Judas is more of a stand on the box and deliver guy. That's the same here. Now, eventually, the spirit of the sorceress sends an imp version off, disguised as Mercury. So that lands as, oh, it's Mercury. It's one of the gods telling us to do a thing, and had been ordered by Jove to do so. Now, in the original Aeneid, it's Jove himself who sends Mercury to get Aeneas to leave. There's a storm a-coming, and Aeneas got to hit the ricky road. Now, here's the weird thing. One, Aeneas, of course, one cannot stand against the word of God, so you have to go. But the writing here kind of speeds and stalls at the same time. The whole crew is having this lovely picnic with food and mirth at 1 second, and then it's ruined and Aeneas is ready to go in an instant. It just, bam, happens like that. From the second act to the third act. And then there's supposed to be a witch's chorus that's lost, and then it sort of stops and jumps directly to the ships getting ready. And the third act opens with sailors dancing, which is, again, kind of fun, kind of simple, and they're having sort of a raucous job of it. The sorcerer's team, though, is set to putting Aeneas down to Davy Jones's locker. Well, whatever Davy Jones's locker will be down the line. But then it's basically a jump cut to Dido being all sad that Aeneas is gone. Only Aeneas comes back. I'm pretty sure there's stuff missing in there, because it's just so quick that it feels like we're about to get a lament. Something is going to happen. But it doesn't. Just goes straight to, here's Dido having a moment, and then Aeneas comes back. It does play out a little bit like that in the Aeneid, but there's more of, I don't want to say a separation, but it feels like there's distance. Now, Aeneas comes back and says he'll never leave her again, that he disobey the gods themselves to stay with her. And that's a huge sacrifice, and one that would have possibly played against the ideas of the listeners at the time. Disobeying the word of God to go with one's heart? No, you can't do that. You always have to do what the gods meant. But here, love is stronger than that. So it's a romantic idea that I think clearly indicated that we were going to get a fall. So now, Dido, she'll have none of it. Because once he decided to leave her, there ain't no going back. She made the hardline choice that if you don't choose me every time, you don't get to choose me again. That's a very modern concept, honestly. It's a one and done. And of course, the witch was right. Dido would rather die than live in a world where Aeneas wouldn't choose her first all the time. And so she dies, kills herself. And the exchange between the two of them is the operatic, leading up to that point, is the operatic version of a 1930s screwball comedy. It's literally perfect. It's back and forth and pointing, doom, 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 ping, pong, back and forth, and great. And before she goes off to Heaven's Half Acre, Dido delivers the first famous aria in the English language, Dido's Lament. And the meat of it is some of the most beautiful poetry of the time. Quote, "Thy hand, Belinda, darkness shades me. On thy bosom let me rest. More I would, but death invades me. Death is not a welcome guest. When I'm laid in earth, may my wrongs create no trouble in thy breast. Remember me, but forget my fate." That is so fucking goth.
I cannot shun. Death must come when he is gone.
I love it. I really do. It's utterly teenager, no? And it's unlikely that teens have changed in the years since teenager became a thing, right? This is what makes me feel as if this version might have been written with the dance school in mind, with a younger group. The way it plays out feels like the strongest teenage crush of all time, playing out to the maximum. Also, I should point out that when Dido takes it home and makes it her show is here. It's in Dido's Lament, just like Jesus' turn at Gethsemane in Jesus Christ Superstar. It's the most powerful individual moment in the entire show. And it shows what an aria is always supposed to be, the interior moment of the character at the moment of the most critical events in an opera. The way this delivers us to Dido's fate is not interior, it's exterior, she's talking to Belinda, among others, but it is the rawest sense of the interior externalized, because she is fully aware that this is the time of her death, and she has to release it all into the world. She can take nothing with her where she is going. The haunting phrase that is repeated, "Remember me, but forget my fate," it's just about the most powerful statement one can make. It sounds like a suicide note from a 90s teen drama. Remember me for the good times, not for the way I died. Sound familiar? It's powerful stuff. And here Purcell's music seems to be able to draw out every ounce of that emotion. And I'll get to a little bit more on that later, sort of. Dido's Lament has been performed separate from the opera many times. In fact, for a large portion of the 18th and 19th century, the only thing of Purcell's that was widely known was that lament. There's an incredible version with Milena Ernmans giving a very deep acting job to it. And it doesn't have the power of delivery that the Royals' Bernadette Johns does. It's more evocative, perhaps, but I couldn't see that being what the original would have been like. Is that a bad thing? No. I think both work, and that's why you have no set rules for how you perform. Both of them examine this in different ways. And it feels like Bernadette Johns hits it in a different path, where using her voice to do more of the carrying, whereas the emoting of Milena Ernman does a great job of that. Also, yes, there is a Jeff Buckley version and a Klaus Nomi version. The Klaus Nomi version is really fun. Now, here's where I learned, or at least attempted, to learn something about how it worked. You must remember, I know nothing of music. The secco recitativa is one of the foundation bits of Florentine opera. Again, this is supposed to be more normal speech than operatic singing. Sort of. And in that case, it allows for raw, bald emotion to come through Dido's delivery. The melody is carried over a ground bass that takes on a chromatic fourth. You are correct. I have no idea what that means. Try as I might, I still can't figure out what half of that means. I do know that it's supposed to be more syllabic. That Dido singing is more about the punch of the individual words than as continuous melody. The base upon which the lament is built is descending, as if it's headed towards an inevitable doom. I can remember watching Stephen Sondheim talking about Sweeney Todd, saying that he would give the dark descending modes, but then always a little bit of potential hope. But that doesn't appear here. It is the constant descent, as if being weighed down. Makes the whole thing more powerful. And for the most part, the syllables match the notes being played, save for the drawn-out words, laid and ah. This is especially powerful in remember me. But that melts away in forget my fate until the last devastating note, a whole note, that accompanies the last word. Fate. That blew my mind. I still don't understand it. But I get how they interact. and I love it. Now here's what I learned. While I still don't know how Dido's Lament worked on a technical level, I now feel it. And I kind of get how that feeling is brought out. I think there's something that's important for me to remember as I go along on this. That opera is an emotive art form. Maybe not so much contemporary opera. That might be a little more conceptual and theoretical. But certainly the first few centuries, you can claim the backstory and the mystery that every production must try to unravel is the interesting part. I don't think so. I think it's the fact that it's a teen drama played out operatically against the backdrop of mythology. In a way, it's an inverse version of O or 10 Things I Hate About You. Wait, those are both Shakespeare, and well, just go with it. I can say, having listened to a few versions of it, all of them fairly different, they all delivered in flat-out vocal presentation. It's not subtle. This one is not subtle at all. And I think that speaks to its potential and or probable origin as a piece for youth. Could it be that the Royal Academy's slightly rougher version may be what the original was written like for courtly performance? Absolutely, it could have been. Do I think the lament speaks to a simpler understanding, though? Maybe. Of course, mythology is full of characters that are literal or figurative gods who are basically early 2000 CW show characters, with Dido being one of the pronounced examples. The version by Virgil of Dido's death, where she burns all of Aeneas' stuff and kills herself with Aeneas' sword, is way more adult than we get here. It feels a whole lot more like Fatal Attraction, honestly. The fact is, the gods themselves that send Aeneas off instead of a witch is another big important difference, and likely does speak to it being used as a metaphor for something larger, something likely political. Because this is a political piece. Dido was the leader and founder of Carthage. Aeneas, a Trojan. There are themes that you could pull from the entire continuum of the Western canon, even at that point, that show the political implications there that you could easily tie to. I really enjoyed the Royal Academy version. I highly recommend supporting them so they can keep doing these live streams. I'll have a link. There's a lot of talent there and so much vibrato. I dig that. I'm told a lot of opera fans don't necessarily like that, and I gotta admit, it makes me feel like I'm watching opera. And if I'm gonna watch opera, I want to feel like I'm watching an opera. Again, just like one of my favorite films, Center Stage, I don't want opera for every man. I want tiaras and diamonds and shit. That's all for this time. The next one, it's one actually that I considered doing for my first one, but I think saving it for a couple to get a little bit under my belt is good because it's going to be a bit meaty. It's Così fan tutti. I Really Want to Like Opera is a Christopher J. Garcia thingy. Comments? Send a note to journeyplanet@gmail.com. Want to support us? We got a Patreon like everyone else. We're 3 Min Modernist. That's on Patreon. They'll also be in the show notes, don't worry. Thanks for listening.